Good afternoon, everyone. You're supposed to say good afternoon back. Okay, we've got a session. We've got 15 minutes. For those that know me, I can talk about this for about 15 hours. So I'm setting my reminder on my watch to let me know when it's 15 minutes. And we've got 5 minutes for questions. Brand. Where do we start? What is brand? What's a great brand? It's far more than logo. It's far more than colors. It's far more than everything that you associate really with a brand. It's ultimately what we're going to go through today is about how you can use a brand to make you feel differently. If we think about well-being and the context of well-being, the biggest challenges that we seem to face out there is when we look at everything the what, there are an awful lot of products. I'm sure when you look at your own ecosystems, the presentations I've already attended today, there's loads of things out there. They all talk about well-being. They're all different things to help you overcome and achieve your strategy. That's great. There's a little bit more conversation around the how. So how do you go about making these more effective? There's very few things around the why. Ultimately, what makes a difference? What changes people's behavior? So I'm going to spend a bit of time going through, first of all, nothing to do with brand. I'm going to spend a bit more time looking at data, hopefully a little bit differently than what you would have seen at some of the other sessions. Then I'll go on to brand at around about halfway through the session and connect the two. Key thing, and I have my notes on my phone. I don't know if you've ever used Pages. It's a great little mechanism. It scrolls through, but you've got to get it right, otherwise it goes too fast or too slow. So if I refer to that, apologies there. The key thing with brand, though, it is the icing on the cake. If you get it wrong, and I can think numerous people will think of the Ratner's example on brand, it can make a profound difference. If you're as old as me, you'll think about Arthur Andersen, the accountancy firm, the effect of brand, WorldCom, etc. They got the brand wrong, the business has gone. Does anyone know, briefly connecting through the brand, I'll go through, Snapchat. Does anyone know what happened to Snapchat about 3 months ago and their share price? Anyone use Snapchat? Go on then, what happened?
It shot down because Kylie Jenner said bad things about it.
Everyone hear that? It shot down. Do you know how much it shot down by?
A significant amount.
So, just over $1 billion in 5 minutes. Just reflect there. $1 billion in 5 minutes because some reality TV program or reality TV star, I'm afraid to say I actually knew who she was beforehand, actually said something bad about their brand. Just keep that in mind when we start talking about the importance of brand. Okay, so you'd have seen slides like this already. I'm sure if you'd have attended some of the sessions this morning like I did, you ought to see slides that talk about data. It talks about how do you look at data and what are the things you really should be looking at. Okay, this slide is just one example of that. It talks about the things that on the right-hand side that we know about well-being, the things that happen, and it talks about the reasons why those happen. So what? Why is that important from a data perspective? Well, actually, when you look at your communication strategy, your engagement strategy, when you start looking at the data, especially on the left-hand side, you start being able to prioritize. We did some research last year on engagement. We did it on engagement spend. And there was loads and loads of data we threw out to the market. But the one bit that really stuck in my mind was for every pound that people spend, that we all spend on reward and benefits, for every pound, anyone any idea how much is actually spent on communicating those reward and benefits? I could use Slido, but I chose not to. 4p in every pound. 4p. And when you actually look at what you spend, there's a continuum between, let's call them risk-based communication things. What do I mean by that? Booklets, loads of text, loads of things that people care nothing about, that don't read, that goes in a drawer, goes under in a filing cabinet, through to something that actually people want to engage with. If you look at that 4p, 3p was spent on this end of the spectrum, and only 1p in every pound was spent on that side. The point being, and bringing it back to brand and the communication strategy, using data to focus your spend, even if you're only spending a penny, is absolutely fundamental. Okay, so we take that one step further, and I'll bring my thing back here. Actually sounds quite easy, doesn't it, really? Here's a process we use. It's brilliant. Absolutely perfect. It works every time. Well, sort of. Well, never. It's a great process in theory, but ultimately it's the data that informs what we do. So we look at it the flip side. Without the right data, you may be addressing the wrong issues. With the right data, you can focus and actually focus on something that people care about. You've got to ultimately make people feel differently to make them change their behaviours. Okay. And I'll keep going back into the feelings and emotions. Something, if you're British in the room, you often find quite difficult to talk about and deal with. Pretty fundamental. Okay, so why would you get the right data? What does it actually help you do? There's no point collecting stuff unless it does one or all of these things. Take pictures, please. It's important. Okay? Getting the right data enables you to create a platform for success. How many of you have actually got a defined well-being strategy? How many of you have got it on one page? Pretty fundamental. Strategy is really important. Getting it onto one page is absolutely critical because then you can link it to this. And what should be on that strategy? 4 things. It's really simple. Objectives, goals, the actual strategies, so the how. So we're talking objectives and goals are the why. Why on earth are you doing this? Why do you get out of bed in the morning to do this? Strategy is the how, the measures are the what. Get that onto one page, connect it to these elements with the right data informing that. You've got a lot of a good approach for success from that side. So, let's actually look at some real basic examples to start with. Great believer in starting simple. I've got 3 case studies today. All of them are existing case studies where we're working through. First one, the use of heat maps. What does this tell you? If you can actually read the words, it actually looks at the instances of mental health issues and absences within the UK on a multi-locational based employer. What does that tell you? Well, what's the point in spending a huge amount of time and effort and money on mental health issues in Scotland? Vis-a-vis South and around London in this example. If you need to focus and budget's an issue, start to look at your data. However, most of you will realise that actually, if you look at mental health instances, absences are seasonal. Every single client we've run through our models, absences are seasonal. Real basic way of looking at that, think about your financial year. Go back 3 months and start looking at your absence data from there. Why? Because you're coming to the end of your targets, your ways of working. People get stressed. They either realise they're not going to achieve their targets and try and do something about it, or actually they realise they're going to struggle and they go off sick. Really simple way of looking at it. So, seasonal-wise, focus your effort on engagement at the right point in time. There's no point doing a mental health campaign in June if your financial year is 1st of April, if the data is telling you what most of our clients' data tell us. So, we take that through and we actually start to look at, look at the when. Let's actually start to look at brand. It's a small part of the communication campaign and strategy, and it's also a huge part. It's one in the same. Back to the point I said at the beginning, the colours, the logos, they're a small part. The way the brand makes you feel, the way it enables your employees to identify with your business, with your EVP, is critical. Ultimately, brand is about trust, and if you are unable to connect the dots for your employees, you've lost them. You have absolutely lost them in getting them to engage with who you are as a business. Back to the point we talk about well-being. If you just focus on the what and tell them that you've got loads of things everywhere, so what? What does it mean to me? So when we look at brand, we are ultimately looking at 4 things. And if you remember nothing else from this session, please remember these 4, okay? If you want to change people's behaviours, you first have to get their attention, okay? The impact is critical. A strong and differentiated brand is an easy way to do this. If I compare that in a different way, how many of you have a separate wellness or well-being brand compared to the business brand? Okay. So question to those that don't, why do you want to treat your employees the same way you treat your customers? Why do you want to identify or get your employees to identify your business in the same way that you want your customers to identify with your business? If you can answer that question in a positive way, then keep doing it. If actually you struggle with the answer to that question, revisit what you're doing around your brand. Another way, if employees look at your business like your customer do, you're going to fall down and you're going to absolutely struggle to achieve what you want to do. Someone this morning talked about different places to put stuff. What I thought was really, really interesting, you've got people's attention broadly for about 5 seconds when you try and communicate with them. Less than the memory of a goldfish, something that always sticks in my mind. Unless they can visually identify with something that's connected to wellness, there and then you've lost them. So again, vis-a-vis the impact, if you're communicating with them in exactly the same way that you're communicating with your customers, they're just going to think it's customer stuff. They're going to go on to something else. Impact. Simplicity. Everyone talks about simplicity. It's really, really hard to do. There's an old aphorism about Mark Twain. Anyone knows it? It's far harder to write 10 words than 1,000. Goes back to the point that we mentioned earlier around the risk-based comms towards the engaging-based comms. Keep it simple. Find ways to write in the right way. I run an engagement workshop for clients, and one of the pieces of work we do, we get everyone to stand up, and I put a bit of text on. It's actually a bit of text I wrote, which is really bad, when I was a consultant and doing some hard work. And I asked them to sit down when they stop being engaged. It's a big long bit of text. It's brilliant. I think the text is amazing. It's really, really technical. It's exactly correct. It's so boring, it's unbelievable. Within about 5 seconds, everyone sat down thinking, this is insane. I then put a bit of text up that is written by a journalist. It's really engaging. It's actually about a car. I do it on purpose because it annoys about half the audience. It's actually written by Jeremy Clarkson. The reason being is when he writes things, he writes it to be read, to be enjoyed, to be engaged. You might not agree with what he's writing about, but at least you actually engage with it. It's the same point around simplicity. Choose the message, keep it simple. The last two, relevance. I can go on about relevance till the cows come home on this one. There's so much noise out there. We mentioned Snapchat, Facebook, WhatsApp. Last bit of research, I think I saw that 72% of millennials, I might be making that stat up, so don't quote me, 72% of millennials, their first thing in the morning is to check their social media. How many people do that first thing in the morning? How embarrassing is that we've put our hands up to say that? That's not great. I'm just as bad at everything. You check it, but you're looking at relevance. What do you check? You check things that are relevant to you. Us, as an employer body, have got to overcome this other noise that's outside of that if we want to change behaviours, if we want to make things habitual. How do we best do that? We have to do things and communicate and engage with people and make it relevant. How do we make it relevant? It has to be personalised to that individual. Back to the 4 boxes. You want to cover your backside, do the risk-based stuff, doesn't have to be relevant. That's legal stuff, that's statutory stuff, that's mandatory stuff. Stuff that stops you going into jail, ultimately. You've got to focus on the relevancy, on the engaging side of things. My point being is, don't personalise a booklet. No one will read it. They might read it if you write it in really simple language and keep it as a one-pager. They might do, probably won't, but they might do. So think about the relevance in terms of the actual channel that you're using. And emotion. By far the most important element with brand. If you think about any of the brands that you look at, it's how it makes you feel that makes a difference, not what you're saying. So choose your brand wisely, including the strapline, the colours, and the logo, back to actually some of the more obvious points around brand. If you get the feelings right, you will change behaviour. Conversely, you can get the feelings wrong. I've got many a slide that shows different examples of where branding went wrong. So it isn't an easy thing to do. So, bit of a case study. I chose this client. Anyone know who the FSCS is? Anyone read their really boring financial literature? It's on the last page at the bottom. They're the end people that you really go to after everything else, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. We've actually only got about 250 staff in London. It's probably the most boring organisation you could possibly think of. Imagine trying to engage when you work in a business like that. What do? There's loads of stuff here. They ultimately revamped their EVP, recognising what made them different. They understood that people worked for them because actually they wanted to make a difference, not just to pick up a check. So they re-engineered everything they did around engagement, around communication and brand, particularly around the wellness of their staff, to overcome the challenges or the perceived challenges of who they were as a business. They kept it in a structure that made people understand. They kept it simple. What haven't they done? Well, if we look forward, they have been looking at this. And this is just one lens to view next steps and stage of the world. What does this really tell us? On the left-hand side, that's the way we educate our children today. That's the way as a society we treat ourselves. A linear approach. You're born, you're told some stuff, you go into the workplace with the same employer for 35, 40 years, you then retire using one pension plan and then you die. Brilliant. How many people does that apply to? Absolutely no one. The graphic on the right-hand side has a little bit more of a reality check for us as a society and us as employers. The point being, unless what you do is flexible and able to deal with the world as it is, we talk a lot about ambiguity at Aon, to deal with things that are ambiguous, things that are messy, you're going to struggle. So back to our feelings. To conclude before questions, I want to just go to relevance and feelings and start talking about brand. How does it make you feel? Just a short view of what the FSCS are looking at the moment. The difference being is you can now connect through all of the what down at a personalized level, using your brand as the entry point in and making things utterly relevant, but connecting through hopefully on an emotional level. Now that approach doesn't work for everyone, but you make things personalized, you make them relevant, you will start to connect with a wider range of the people that you're probably connecting with at the moment. So to end this session, my watch has told me that I'm just getting there. It's always useful. I'm going to just defer to the words of one of our global clients, who are actually far better experts probably than we are in this area. Are there any questions? What do you think? Anyone got an answer to that? I like everyone going quiet. I think everything organisation-wide depends. If you were in one of the sessions earlier, someone asked a question that I thought was quite interesting, it's connected with this. They threw out a point around WhatsApp, and they actually talked about WhatsApp and said, my boss, someone might be in the room if you threw the question out, my boss contacted me on a Saturday. I think that's disgusting. I should not be contacted on a Saturday. And everyone in the room, if you're in that session, everyone agreed. I fundamentally disagreed. Point back here, I think it actually depends on the organisational culture of what's right and wrong and whether things work and whether they don't work. So whenever you look at anything around this area, ultimately I think it comes back to the cultural question first. The phrase that comes to mind is culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can all have the great ideas, but unless the culture is right, it will ruin every single idea that we have out there. Oh, interesting. Okay, Aon's an interesting business. It's got loads of different bits. It has a risk and a commercial risk business. And one of my first well-being focus sessions was about 5 years ago, and it actually involved the head of health and safety. And for the first time, this business, they connected themselves internally for the first time, set up a well-being session, and their first focus was around the brand, which was quite interesting in itself. So they didn't need a consultancy to tell them that that was actually important. They'd worked it out themselves. And they internally connected the head of health and safety with the head of reward and with the head of wellness, which they created a new role. And that, we've been working with them for 5 years now. That work is ongoing, and they've done some great stuff with us, but actually some great stuff by themselves, where they connected the dots. I think if you don't do that, you're missing a massive trick. Health and safety was always normally about safety rather than health. But now this has moved up the food chain to the C-suite level. Things are starting to change. So the answer is yes. Employer branding is in the voluntary sector sometimes. Why? Because it gets back to trust. But we have many financial services clients. It's really boring stuff, isn't it? If you work at one of the big banks or investment banks or something like this, and trying to connect through to understanding and identifying with the values and the mission statement of the business, sometimes is quite hard. And overcoming cynicism. And certainly if you look at it from a generational perspective, some generations are more cynical than others. So it's easier in the voluntary sector sometimes, but actually if you approach it in the right way, you really can make a difference even in the most boring sector, which is one of the reasons I chose the FSCS. Any final questions? Okay, thank you very much.